As a whole, I'm so far extremely pleased with how kind of open it feels, and yet how organic the interactions feel. At no point so far have I felt like I'm pushing someone toward an interaction, and yet characters that had very little agency last campaign are just jumping all in to this campaign. And I'm finding players that had characters that had to like take a lot of steps back, things just didn't really work for them, that they didn't really feel as invested or part of the story, are now like all in, and they have everything to at their disposal. We're finding one of our players is uncovering all the like inner cloak and dagger stuff and trying to navigate it, whereas in the last campaign they wouldn't have had the resources or the agency to do so. So it's really cool to see those shifts in dynamics. Anyway, it's really nice, but it seems like we might have a couple points on this.
Yeah, you said something that I thought was really I wanted to quickly unpack, mostly because we're talking about a high level of DM and player investment. And I just wanted to remind everyone that, one of my latest theories is that immersion is a high level technique. Like, this isn't something where if you don't feel like you're running an immersive D&D campaign, you're doing it wrong. In fact, I tend to, when I have a new DM, I have a pretty specific curriculum, if you want to call it. Like the meet in a tavern model, or your adventurers have been adventuring together for a little while model. Like, I think really helps a DM limit the amount of variables that can really mess up the dynamics at the table. So if you assume we've been traveling together for a while, we have a little bit of a railroaded quest, there's something kind of defined so that the players can get to know each other, that's fine at the beginning. One of the things Adam did point out, though, was that he's been playing with these players for a while. He's done the we've met in a tavern model for a while. So branching out into this new style or this new setup, is something where you're not going to have players that are itching to get right into the thick of it, right? Because a lot of times, I've even had this with my grandmother recently, which is new players have a certain idea of what authentic D&D looks like. And if you don't provide them with that authentic experience, at least a little bit, even if you're looking to change their or widen their perspective, they're going to get itchy in wanting to get to the D&D stuff, right? So if you have like a scene where it's like, it's the first session and we spend the whole 3-hour session ordering breakfast, it's like, well, when do I get to fight the dragons and in the dungeons, Whereas like a lot of, when you've had, it's always been like this, what's your first D&D character? Human fighter with a sword and shield. What's your 50th D&D character? I'm a loaf of bread that casts Mage Hand on itself to serve itself around, and it also casts nothing but yeast spells. What you want from the game gets deeper or weirder, or it goes off the rails, so, and having this kind of, day by day slow burn approach, I feel like is super appropriate for players that have already kind of gotten the initial excitement of what D&D means out of them, so that they can free themselves to play a more immersive game like Adam is talking about.
Instead of me prepping like I think what I used to prep for Grey Owls, which was I'm going to prep everything in the world that they could possibly interact with, and then they only interact with a little bit of it, or they interact with something I didn't even think about because I didn't know what their characters were thinking. Now, after every session, I'm sending them directives about short-term goals, long-term goals. What did your perspectives change at all based on this last session? And it's okay if they didn't. What are you what is your long-term focus or short-term focus? Immediate questions that need to be answered, all that stuff. And then I can feel like, okay, is it appropriate for me to give them those answers or give options for those? That gives me an arc for each of them. And then those arcs, like those, I love this, those arcs will cross. If like, oh, I know privately, this character and this character are going to, they listen to the podcast. If Vera and Tarka share the same goals, they'll of course meet at some point, and then there can be an interaction there. And if they are there and I have an NPC that also has those same goals, they'll also meet and they'll cross paths, and there's something else going on there. And that provides an arc, like a play-by-play of what could transpire over the course of the session. It also makes it so my 3-act or even 4-act structure is very character driven, at least at the moment. It's all about who wants to do what, and everybody wants to do something. And that also comes from me understanding these players and they understanding me and the type of worlds that we built. So there's a great rapport there. I would not recommend this at the beginning of someone's experience DMing.
The one thing I believe that will kill a new DM's experience is trying to go too big too fast, and having this expectation of, I'm gonna run a 4-year-long campaign with deep character interactions and immersion, and it's gonna be like Critical Role or College Humor, or like it's not just paying attention to the present moment and what your players want at the table. You know, sometimes you just want to kill some goblins in a cave. You don't want to sit there and be like, well, really, how did goblins come about from the beginning of time, and what is their pantheon, and what is their cult? Like, sometimes you don't need that, right? So if you're a newer DM, you know, just do one step at a time. If you're hearing to a lot of these techniques and you're thinking, wow, this sounds really amazing. Remember, we've been DMing and podcasting we're going on, I want to say 4 years now. So like, we've been pushing the flywheel of this for a really long time. If you listen back to our first few episodes, there are even some opinions that have radically shifted. And there have been some, we've learned a lot more, and kind of, you know, we've sculpted our approach a little more finely. So like, you want to allow yourself that change. You don't want to like start with a marathon, you know, you need to train up to it. So you need to put the reps and the experience in. Start with something simple. I always recommend Lost Minds of Phandelver, right? But, you know, if you're a DM that's sick of Lost Minds of Phandelver, or you have a group that you know you can trust and wants this kind of experience, because remember, what Adam just said is really important too, which is not only does he check in with his players check in with him. So if they want a socially interactive experience where they feel like their choices matter, and they want a little bit more say in the kind of things that they explore in the world that he's presented, that's going to affect how he runs his game, you know? So it's definitely a legitimate approach. Don't think you have to do this approach to have fun. And if it's something you want to explore, I'm pretty sure you'll find some value in it.
And I mean, each Night Owls season was a year, really. The first season, I think, actually took 2 years. And the second season is a year. Third season was our whole gaming set changed, and now we're in the 4th season. So that's what, 2, 3, 4. It's 4 years at least doing Night Owls. Gray Owls took 2, almost 3 years to fully complete. And so with each of these things, and I've got one-shots and weekly campaigns and bi-weekly campaigns, the more that you do that, and it's still good to kind of come back. And I have a D&D club now that is at my school, and we're doing Lost Minds of Phandelver. And it's so great to kind of return to tavern, small adventure, goblin ambush, okay, go. It's so powerful. I think the more that we do this, though, I find value in all sorts of scenarios of gaming. And even Lost Minds of Phandelver, I now run it slightly differently than I would even at the beginning, because certain skill sets have fully refined, which I find really kind of fascinating too. I don't even use the book anymore because it's just in my head now. And I know that even if it goes off the rails a little bit, it's okay if we're having fun, and I'll bring them back if they need to. But when you're first starting out, tavern model works really well. you all know each other bypasses the awkwardness, especially with kids, who are like, I don't want to work with you. I'll throw a pie at your face. And it's like, maybe you're all together and you've all been adventuring together for a few years. Oh, well, okay. It lets you bypass a lot of those other points of resistance.
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.